Hey everybody, welcome back. So we have a special guest today. This is Ben. We've worked on several job sites together in the past. I've known him for about 4 years, and I know that's crazy to me. But he's a great guy. I wanted to have him on his show because he has a very unique perspective. So,
just a little introduction about myself. I know Nate's channel talks about construction and blue collar. I graduated high school from a very academically inclined family. They thought I should have been white collar and engineer, something to that sort, especially my mother. She would have preferred to see me that way because that was her understanding of success, as so many of you can probably relate to. But I saw a different thing. I saw the cattle herding of all of my peers into college, even though they weren't necessarily prepared for that. And so I said, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go into aircraft maintenance. So a year and a half of that schooling, short explanation, that led to a path of me working from warehouses to maintenance facilities to engine repair to hydraulic testing to electroplating to a vast number of things that somehow employed my technical skills that I started with in aircraft maintenance. That led me down a journey of exploring different things. I took a little tangent of 18 months in tech support. And then I discovered the electrical trade when I realized I didn't want to be sedentary for a living. And I discovered the electrical trade after some temp jobs, and I said, okay, this is the diverse thing I've been looking for. It employed my working skills, it employed my hands, it employed my mind. It was sort of the mix I had been looking for to be a smart guy but also a handyman and succeed at that. So I'm now 10 years into that trade. I sometimes hate it but usually love it. So
depends on the people you work with, right?
It depends immensely on who I'm working with and whether I have to fight an uphill battle for intelligent things to happen or a downhill battle for intelligent things to happen.
So this is something cool about Ben. He's gone on kind of a spiritual journey, and one of the things that I've been talking about on my channel is a quiet evolution of what we discuss. And you know, in my welcome video that I just put out, I talk about how Buddhism is on the rise, and I think Ben really encapsulates that kind of spiritual metamorphosis. And so, you know, I think it's fascinating that everyone has a different period of where they start and where they end. Like for me, right, I started as a good little Mormon boy, grew up, was told that, you know, gay is a problem, and you just...
So was I.
Yeah. You're a problem or you're gay?
Gay is a problem.
Gay is a problem.
I remember knocking doors for the LDS church, so I also grew up LDS. I knocked doors for the LDS church to tell them why gays shouldn't be allowed to marry in California, and it's a regretful thing I participated in at this point.
Oh, I think we all, especially those who come from high demand religions, understand that, you know, faith, construction, all of these things have more in common than we want to admit, you know, and it really is a symptom of the cultural landscape that we're in. And I think it's unfortunate because a lot of people look at Ben Shapiro as, you know, the gold standard for morality.
Ooh. And it'll help us.
And I think the issue that we're facing isn't just in conversations like these. The issue we're facing is a religion of ideas. And basically the cultural evolution baton has not been passed down. Because historically speaking, I don't know if you knew this, but on average, a generation ends about every 15 years, right? So I want you to think about something fascinating, and I want to get your perspective on this, because in 1980, there was high inflation, property values were really high, taxes were high, property taxes were high, and interest rates were high. And they're actually at the same rates as they were in the 80s. Here's what's weird, okay? In the 60s and the 70s, you had massive riots, right? in the 80s, you had things that were leading up to the Rodney King riots, but that only impacted the West Coast, right? That didn't really impact anywhere else. It kind of spread through the news, but that was it.
I grew up with several kids that bragged about the new toys they got during the LA riots. So I was close enough to it to know that it happened.
Exactly. And this is why I wanted to have you here. Not to say that you're an old man, but you have a lot more experience than I do. And so the cool thing about this... And some things. But I think the cool thing is that with all of this that had happened, well, maybe it's not that cool. Because basically... the president at the time was like, yo, if you go to college, we'll help subsidize education. That's why education was so cheap in the 80s. It was partially subsidized by taxpayer dollars, which is not the case today. It's
which, when you subsidize things, that just gives the business model a reason, hey, we can charge more because we're being subsidized. Because the entry price is typically governed by how much people are willing to pay out of their own pockets.
Well, not just that, it prevents people from protesting too, and then that religious dogma stays in place versus shattering.
We went from university to religion. Tell me where that tangent came from.
So, what I am getting at here is that religion and the political landscape are one and the same. So basically what has happened is that with the advent of education, you being stuck in an institution instead of protesting, right? Because there was always a new wave of progressivism and the culture was changing every 15 years with the new generation saying, hey, these are my needs, listen to me, rawr.
So let me see if I'm gathering this right. If there is benefit in conformity, you're going to conform both in work and in religion?
Yeah. Exactly. And that's why I wanted to have you here, is because you have this unique religious perspective. I know that was kind of a weird segue to go through, but I think that really encapsulates where we are today, because today we have the far right and the far left who seem diametrically opposed, but they have more in common than they realize. One may be more on the atheist side of the spectrum, but they still have some spiritual center. The far right, they have a spiritual center and they call it the Bible. But they're only cherry picking the parts that align with their values. Then they take those same values with them to the workplace, and that is what has perpetuated the construction industry for the last 40 years. That's how you get low entry numbers, and you see burnout. You see young people leaving in record numbers. I mean, I don't know if you remember working with any of the younger bucks at JT. That was a company that Ben and I worked together at.
They were cool guys. There was a surprising number of very progressive employees at that company, and I think it's because it let them feel at home. You didn't have the norm of right-wing conservatism. You didn't have the norm of homophobia, of chauvinism, of all these other things that, even racism, which I have experienced in very soft yet profound fashions in virtually every electrical contractor I've worked with.
Well, and that's what's strange, is JT was an absolute outlier. They were an exception, not the rule. And the only reason why I left...
For those wondering, I am Latino. So.
Yeah. And the reason... So the reason why I left JT was because I couldn't make enough. I didn't have the upward mobility. And now I've realized that the American dream that I thought I wanted isn't what I want at all. Mm-hmm. And so do I wish I was still there? Yes. Because... I believed in that American dream. I need to get a house. But now I look back and I'm like, I don't want that house.
For the sake of all those who benefited from the existence of that company, I am sad that John Taft retired and put people in charge that would cause it to become just like all the other companies in Utah.
Yeah, because it really was different. I don't think I ever told you the story of how I got hired. So I was dating someone at the time, and we had gone camping, and then I get a text from John, and he says, hey, I need to reschedule the interview for today. And I said, I'm in a mountain, and I can probably be there by 9, but there's no guarantee. He responds with a thumbs up emoji, which tells me, crap, I need to find a way to get there as soon as possible. And so I borrowed my buddy's car that didn't have the tent and all the camping supplies, and I head right down the mountain, still smelling like campfire, and I find a truck stop, take a quick shower, and I look like a disaster. I look pretty good for, just being, around a campfire like 20 minutes earlier, but it worked out. And I got the job, and he's like, the fact that you were halfway up the mountain, I thought we were going to have to try and reschedule for 2 weeks, but you're here. So
it almost seems like a tactful open door that he left you. Just give you a thumbs up.
Like,
that's not clear.
It's
that's
not
not saying, okay, let's get you down that mountain into this interview, or okay, let's reschedule. The thumbs up is so ambiguous it almost seems like a test. Well, he wanted to see what you would do.
I think he wanted to see what I would do, one. But I talked to some other people that had been interviewed by John, and they said, he was very flexible with the ability to interview, whether it was early in the morning, evening, or even on weekends. And so the thumbs up emoji gave me this option, like I could go down either path, and it wasn't going to hurt me any. But I have this mentality, and maybe it's just because I'm on the spectrum, maybe it's the autism speaking, I don't know. I interpret that as I need to get my rear in gear and go down there now. But I did, and I got the job, and it was an absolute blessing. I remember working with some crazy people. I don't know if you ever worked with, tall, lengthy guy. He ran Ironmans. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I do recall this person.
He was their first foreman that they ever hired.
Not ringing a bell.
Lawrence.
Yeah, I don't think I worked with Lawrence, but all right. What about him?
He is a go-getter, really great guy, and very spiritually ambiguous. He always made fun of the church. It was hilarious, and I think he was well ahead of his time. And I wish I was paying attention then. Because back in 2020, during the 2020 election, he's like, no matter what happens, everybody, you're still going to have a job. And we have a job to do. But stay politically aware, be brave, make good choices. And there were several other people that were really huge on the Trump train, and they're like, oh, he still can win, with all these other paths to victory, and even though the election had already won and Biden had clearly won.
Yeah. I was less troubled by the platform that people were supporting behind Trump. People will have their opinions, and more so their belief in his integrity, which
was slightly disconcerting.
Any honest investigator, even among the smartest Trump voters I know, will say, yeah, he doesn't have track record of integrity.
They just wanted a wrecking ball.
They wanted a wrecking ball. I voted for him the first time around with exactly those words behind me. We have too many problems in politics. We don't need another of the same, which would have been Hillary Clinton, another acolyte of that era,
yeah.
That left-wing particular group of the Clinton machine.
But I do think we still, looking back now, I do think we would have been better off with Clinton. I truly believe that.
Only because Trump was so bad, in my opinion.
Well, and what's funny is Trump took credit for all of Obama's accomplishments, which really, really is weird to say, because I thought
which is believable, because so many of them didn't really take fruition until Trump's term.
Well, and I didn't realize they were all Obama's policies. I just want to know why the hell it took Obama so long to enact them. That part is slightly unclear to me.
Think about it. Now, this is complete theory, but the right wing did so much holding things up of his policies, and they did so much stonewalling. When it was time to see Trump in, and they saw Trump had a real chance of winning, it's possible they just let some of it go through that they knew would be good for the public when it came to policy making.
Or do you think they thought Hillary was going to win, and that Hillary would pass some of the same stuff that Obama did? Because Hillary was the Secretary of State.
Perhaps I'm speculating too far. Maybe they thought some of it would be ruinous. They legitimately thought it would be bad for America, and so they let it go through right before Clinton got in office. and it turned out to be beneficial to the image of Trump. Who knows?
It could have been any number of things, but the fact of the matter is just like things have evolved and people have found refuge in different political agencies because of the lack of responsibility when it comes to the Christian movement.
Yes.
Because the Christian movement has essentially said, we need to protect what we've had. That's what conservationism is. That's what conservatism is. It's protect everything and everything from the past without any consideration of evolution. Which is interesting because you and I had a conversation yesterday where I think that Bernie Sanders and AOC are Republicans.
I still think it's a broad stretch that stretches back to the early 1900s Republican Party. But yes, if you turn back the party's 80 years, 90 years, they in fact would be Republicans. Just a reminder for those not aware, the Republican Party was the founding party of Social Security.
Also the founding party of national parks and public services and you name it, the Republican Party of 1930 probably brought it to pass, including higher taxes for the wealthy, by the way. Just friendly reminder, in case Ben Shapiro forgot. I don't think he's going to watch this video, but in case he does, I'm looking at you. Okay?
And if the scripts have flipped, yes, the Democratic Party was the racist party.
And who's the racist and the homophobic now?
Yeah.
Weird. The question is when. But I don't think that is really the biggest problem. I think the biggest problem is that people are looking for that religious refuge and they've gone to politics versus, going towards Buddhism or other things like you have, right? Because I was the same way. High demand religion.
Caveat. I glean a lot of things from Buddhism, but I don't exactly put the title upon myself.
And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I do. I put that title on myself. I do identify as a Buddhist. Does that mean that should be a part of the LGBT's nomenclature? And no, I don't think so.
You can't see it from here, but Nate has a very beautiful Buddhist sculpture behind him.
Yes, it's my Buddhist water fountain. I plug it in when I do cooking. It's very meditative because it's very calming. But there's something interesting about Buddhist principles because it's all about internal self-healing and looking to the stars for guidance. People say, oh, well, the wise men were Christians. The wise men were star sinkers. They were basically hedonistic stargazers traveling through the cosmos across many different lands and many deserts just to find the Christ child. And it's coincident that we now know that the three wise men were not traveling together initially. They met up with each other along the way because they realized they were on the same journey. And I think that's all indicative of what the trades could be because we're all in it to provide a life for our families, ourselves, and those that we interact with. And I think what has happened is that we have forgotten that the American dream is actually bankrupting us. We don't need a 3,000 square foot house. We don't need a 2-car garage. We don't need 2 cars or more per household. We don't need to live far away from a city because it doesn't align with our values. When you could literally find compromise with those who live in those urban environments. That's why I'm a huge fan of European culture because it's about compromise. They have dozens of political parties because it's about compromise.
Well, think about it. There's a certain fiber of humanity that was unable to compromise, and they thought it was worth taking the significant chance of dying crossing the Pacific Ocean, let alone encountering the dangers and hazards of the New World in America. People that were capable of compromise, the meek, if you will, that would inherit that land, they stayed in Europe. The people that were too unruly or too ambitious for Europe, those are who settled this land. And I would say the same of people that came from Mexico. My parents, my mom immigrated with her family when she was 12. My dad immigrated
think of
when
the
she was
Spanish
21.
conquistadors.
The Spanish conquistadors, they were
Zealots.
Yeah, they were zealots. They were after something. They were mentally lottery players. They had a lot to lose. They could lose everything on this journey, even just to the ocean, let alone the hazards of the new land. But they could also become kings of this uncivilized land that was the Aztec home.
Well, and that's what's wild to me is because the Aztecs had a god of gay. I'm not sure if you knew that. His symbol was a marigold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what was his representation?
For those only listening, I use quotes when I said uncivilized.
Uncivilized. So basically, this god of gay, I can't remember his name, but he was very much about sports, poker, gambling, and intimacy, especially with those of the same sex. And people say, "Oh, well, that's cult-like." Well, let's be clear here. Any organization that has dogmatic values is a cult. Period. End of story. It doesn't matter if it's a religion. It doesn't matter if it's a company. If you will cut off your left arm for a corporation, you're a part of a cult. Congratulations. The only difference is they're probably paying you.
Hopefully very well.
Hopefully very well. No promises of that. But this is what's crazy to me is like, just like you said, they came over here with the intention of losing everything. And my phrase has always been that the people that left Europe, especially the English, the Queen was like, another protest, another riot. We can't execute them. That would look bad. Your Majesty, if you just put them on that boat, you could. They could be gone. They could die. Anything could happen. Because you notice that those chartered vessels were all paid for by the crown and the monarchy. The people that settled this land did not pay a penny.
Well, here's the hugely beneficial thing about expedition and war. The people most willing to risk blood for glory, they're typically already marginalized. They don't have any opportunities in the systems that be, and so they can eject themselves into this all or nothing trial where they may come back a hero or they may die. Either way, their suffering ends.
Well, and here's something fascinating. So the first colony in America from England was not religious. It wasn't the Pilgrims. It was the lost colony of Roanoke.
Remind me.
So basically, and they just barely solved and closed this case, literally in March of this year. It's so cool.
Yeah, I've heard the name once before, and I don't remember anything about it.
So essentially, for those who don't know, what happened was in the mid-1500s, Francis Scott Key and a whole bunch of other people came to the New World, and they got through the Outer Banks of North Carolina and landed on an island called Roanoke Island, right between the mainland and right between the Outer Banks of North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
The Outer Banks of North Carolina is also where Blackbeard was executed, for those who love this pirating history too. But the cool part about this is it is not only a story of survivalism and the inherent ability to survive, but it's also a story on how cultures can mesh. There was is to this day, a Croatoan tribe of Native Americans, and these colonists, because they were running out of resources on this island, really harsh winters, basically everything that went wrong could have gone wrong. And so Francis goes back to England to get more supplies, but because of everything breaking out in Europe, he can't come back for another 4 or 5 years. Thinking he's going to come back and see war, bloodshed, madness, burned down homes. comes back and sees no stone unturned. Everything's gone, belongings, everything. But there is literally no sign of war or famine. Zero. Everyone is gone. Not even unmarked burial sites, nothing.
So when it comes back to Roanoke?
Uh-huh. In the 1590s. But what happened were these settlers integrated with the Native American tribes. And there appears to have been a split. Some of them went north and more inland towards Maine.
Mm-hmm.
And the weird thing about going that direction, that's where the hostile Native Americans lived, who didn't want the settlers, but they integrated naturally with those peoples. And then the other half went down with the Croatoans. The interesting thing, what they found with the Croatoans, is they excavated Hatteras Island.
Mm-hmm.
So Hatteras Island is where the Croatoans lived. I can't remember. I think they called it Croato at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But when they did seismic readings underground, everything was in neat and straight lines. Well, the Croatoans typically built things in zigzag patterns, not straight organized blocks like the Europeans did. And so when they did dig up some spots, they found burial sites and everything felt very European. And then they did some blood work on some Croatoans that live today, and they were able to trace back the genealogy to not to the Puritan settlers, but to those first Roanoke settlers that were not religious.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they were so not religious that they named the firstborn person in that colony, Virginia, after the Queen of England at the time, which really shows you that they were not as religious as you think they were. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they had a religious bent to them, but it was nowhere near as extreme as the Puritans.
Yeah, I mean, the Puritans were defined by that. I mean, the choice of the name, Puritan, we try to keep pure even though we burn witches, you know.
Yeah, well, they were basically the Taliban of the 1600s, so...
For those that don't know the history, these were the people that were too religious for Christian England.
Which is kind of surprising, because Christian England was also the same place where if you said anything against the Bible, you could also be hanged.
Correct. And these people wanted a stronger, stricter, more, they might have called it Christ-like, law and order.
So America was founded, long story short, in the Puritan ideal, not the American ideal like everyone proclaims. And that's why a lot
To be fair, I don't know if this is fair, but this is how it broke down. Our modern law, our modern judicial structure is based off of the Bible. The language that we use in law is biblical. The Ten Commandments were almost a model for how we're supposed to write laws today. You shall not, you may not, you know.
Thus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and this is what's interesting to me, is if you look at society, any industry, especially in America, just the United States. I'm not talking about Canada, I'm not talking about Mexico, because they have their own issues and their own cultures. But what's interesting about the States is that there's this idea that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that also includes your body, your spirit, and your industry. Because they're worried about messing with any portion of the culture or the environment will disrupt one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Income. And I think that is incredibly tragic, because if you're messing with income, right, and you're arguing about how people can or cannot do certain things, you're really talking about restrictions, not trying to find ways to be creative and innovate, which is what America has been. And if you think about every innovation, it's come at times of protest. Like the first personal computer that was widely used was really created by Apple, right? You think about that. That's kind of a big deal. Because at the time, Xerox had made a operating system and they didn't think it was going to go anywhere. They made a huge miscalculation, and now they're known for photocopiers. Congratulations!
Yeah, practically gave it away, or
basically gave it away.
They didn't even make money off of that, did they?
No. They literally just showed it off like it was a toy.
That's right. It's funny you use that statement. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it is a mentality that keeps us in the Stone Age. Because someone always had to say, you know what, there's this crazy idea I've got, and maybe we can rub two sticks together. I noticed they get hot. I was playing with this thing. Like, why are you playing with sticks? You're an idiot. You're doing nothing. Why are you playing with sticks? We need to go hunt for food. We need to go gather berries. Someone was called an idiot, I guarantee you, for the hours and hours and hours that he spent playing with sticks and a string. But he made fire. And someone was called an idiot for banging rocks together and chipping things off to make a shape. Suddenly they had stonework. And every single innovation that marks mankind's growth through the epics, there's always going to be a crowd of people saying, look at all the time you're wasting trying to do this new thing. People would never take to the skies. You know, the great aviators were so criticized for dreaming the impossible.
Well, and since you're saying that, I had this thought. If grief, protests, and basically upheaval are the consistent strains that build innovation, here's a fun question.
I don't even think it's grief and strain that builds innovation. Yeah. It's grief and strain that creates an opening for the closed-minded majority to accept innovation. Innovation comes from geniuses being geniuses and thinking outside the box and playing with toys and figuring out, hey, I can do this thing. And most of that stays on the hobby shelf. But in times of strife and trial, that's when the public is open. Oh my gosh, we have this problem that needs to be solved. How do we do it? And they turn to the nerds.
They always do. But this is what I was getting at. Since 1980, aggressive and violent protests are down by almost 98%. Not saying that we need to have more aggressive and violent protests, but...
Not saying that we don't not.
Yeah, exactly.
Just kidding.
But what have we noticed? We've noticed a stagnation in innovation because people are trying to appeal to the loudest people in the room, which are the conservatives right now.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're obsessed with conservation and protecting the ideals of yesteryear, what are they going to produce? What are they going to tell you? They're going to tell you, hey, this is the echo chamber you need to be in. These are the standards we need to uphold. These are the values we need to see in media. And this is how we're going to do it. So you now have an explicit roadmap. And not only that, you also have this pervasive idea that if you break free, you're a heathen, right? If you leave the LDS church, for example, and you say, oh, I'm a Buddhist, what's the first thing they say? Oh, I'm so sorry that you're a Buddhist. You'll never know true happiness.
And you're like, even if it's not to your face, they will cry in their closets. I can't believe he's lost. Like,
he's gone.
I am found.
Exactly, and then they mourn you as though you died of a horrible plane crash or something.
And it's extremely regrettable. Like, there was a lot of positives to my marriage, which ended because of religious difference, atop other things. But in my mind and my perception, the religious difference exacerbated every other problem we could have had that otherwise could have been worked out by therapy. But when her heart was broken because I confessed to her that I no longer believed in the church, it was a poison that would lead to death to our relationship.
Which is fascinating to me because I think that's the symptom, that's the actual problem right there, right? Because people will go out there and say that they're open-minded and that they're willing to learn or they're willing to, at least hear you out. But the truth of the matter is that they're not. And what ends up happening...
They're willing to hear you out until Hearing you out requires them changing their worldview.
Or being vulnerable.
Or accepting the possibility that you might be right in a contrasting way to how they think. I.e., you might be right, meaning they could be wrong.
And I think that's a problem. And this seems to be a global problem, but I think it's more pervasive here in the States. And the only reason why is I think that people look back to 2000, people look back to 1950, people look back to 1900 and say, oh, time was better then, time was better then.
What was better then?
Right.
Certainly not women's rights, certainly not
gay rights. Yeah.
The white male had a glorious time in 1950 because he could tell his wife what to do, he could command his trade, he was the boss, everywhere he went, he had sole rights over his family.
Well, yeah. And to your point, this is the exact issue. I think it's dogmatic behavior. It doesn't just start at religion. It doesn't end at any level of belief or value or moral superiority. It ends with the person who says, I'm not willing to hear you out because I've been told you're hedonistic and that your values are wrong because God said so. And at that point, you've already shut off your brain. Even if you claim to be an atheist or you claim to be spiritual but not a Christian, you have been ingrained since your youth that America is the best, we can do no wrong, and that our country is a God-given right.
Well, in the words of a foreman talking about how he has conversations with his very progressive daughter, you can only imagine that dynamic just from that description.
Oil and water.
His stance is one that cannot be taught. He simply says, I know what I know. I know what I know. That is a completely closed door. If I knew what I knew when I was 10 years old, I would still be a child.
What do you think the average age is, personality-wise, when your personality is mostly developed? I'm going to give you 3 options, and I want you to tell me the closest. Is it the age of 5, age of 18, or age of 30?
Boy, that's a tough one. And what do you define as personality?
The core blocks that build your personality that will follow you all the way to the end of your life.
Probably 5.
You're correct. And this is what's fascinating about that metric is that 5-year-olds have this interesting quirk of being curious.
Mm-hmm.
In modern society, we discipline curiosity. How dare you stick that fork in that outlet? How dare you do this? But here's something interesting. I was looking at a journal entry.
To be fair, we don't want the kid to die.
But yeah, I mean, there was an ad I saw for electrical something and good parenting. I don't know why this was used as good parenting, and I know this is kind of a side tangent, but basically it said, go ahead, plug that fork into the outlet, and you just see, light, and you hear this pulsing, and I'm like, I hate that ad, because that is reckless. It doesn't take much power to stop your heart, and especially when you're that little. But what I'm getting at with, playing with electricity or, being curious is that curiosity stopped sometime between the 70s and the 80s. Did you know that the average child plays with toys and games 80% less by the time they're 8? Versus people that were born a decade earlier?
I would allude to the use of tablets and phones. Like, they're no longer playing with dexterous toys, but they can play with these virtual toys that are on their tablet. Just to give you a little contrast to what you're saying. Like, they're not done playing with toys, or they're not veering away from all toys, but they are veering away from tangible, dexterously.
Which I think is crucial because, like,
toys.
most...
I do agree.
I don't think... iPads or technology is inherently bad, but what I would say is like I think it would be cool if kids, especially like little kids, were given like a device that was made safe that they could build themselves, like a tablet that they could build themselves, so they could see how the components go together, because they would get the dexterity, and then at the end they could still play a game on the screen, and it would be satisfying, like a reward after completing a puzzle.
You intrigue me with that idea. Imagine if you just had a modular car building toy. You could put bigger, smaller motors. You could have, modular gearboxes. You could have modular wheels. You could have a modular body. You could limit it to a very small number of things. Engine, types of, whether it's a wind-up motor or an electric motor with batteries. You could have the battery pack type. You could have higher or lower amperage outputs to give bigger or smaller weight. You could have different gearboxes. You could have
the possibilities are endless.
And wheels, but you could limit it to 5 or 6 metrics of bodies, wheels, axles, engine, transmission.
Because essentially, what we've removed so much.
Free idea.
Well, yeah, that is a free idea. But we've removed so much curiosity, and this is why I'm a huge fan of AI. Huge fan. I'm sure you've seen the robots out there that are like laying tile and floating concrete floors.
Oh, yes.
And people are saying, oh, well, that's going to replace our jobs, and that's bad. Let me tell you why it's a good thing. Instead of crying at night at the age of 55, wondering who's going to replace you when you can no longer float a floor, when you can no longer get down on your knees to install an outlet, when you can no longer bend over to check voltages and amperages on a set of lugs. When you get to that point, there's going to be no one to replace you. And the issue is Utah's population has increased, and I've shared this in a lot of videos. And this is why I think the culture is really doing itself a disservice, because essentially we've gone from people overreacting in the industry, right? Trying to preserve the ideals of yesteryear, and it's led to a whole bunch of issues.
Define overreacting to what?
I think they're overreacting to innovations in the industry, and they're overreacting to like the use of technology on job sites. People say, oh, people are lazy. But let me tell you why I think the phone usage isn't really that big of a problem, and the real problem is the culture.
I can tell you a few reasons, but you go first.
I think the biggest reason why people are on their phones is, one, they don't feel like they can own a home. They don't feel like the American dream is at their fingertips, even making a livable wage. 2, that livable wage that a lot of electricians make comes with extreme fatigue and mental degradation because of the culture. When you get told dumb F every single day and they're saying it as a joke, eventually that eats at you and you stop taking it as a joke and you start feeling like you're absolutely worthless.
Correct.
And I really think that we have really done ourselves a disservice. And this is something I talked to Junior about when I had him on, so I'd be interested to hear your opinion, because membership enrollment for the trades across the board has stayed the same since 2001. It's gone up by a few hundred here or there. People say we have record number of enrollment.
By 10 enrollees or what?
Basically. They're going based off of last year's metrics or even 3 years metrics, just to try and make it look better. But if you actually look at it,
if you're up 1%, it's a record number, even though the population might be up 50.
Yeah, and that's the issue. So Utah in 2001 had a population of 1.8 million. Utah now has a population of 3.2. Not quite double.
Close.
But high enough that it's problematic. And we're one of the fastest growing states with consistent growth.
And we talk particularly about the electrical trade because we're both electricians, which, think about how much more electronic your home is than
something
the
you had
1950s home.
Or even the 90s.
Yeah, think about how much more electronic the whole world is. Now, some of you don't know what it takes to open your phone, open your favorite social media, and start browsing cat pictures. But Nate and I have seen the monolithic data centers that powers that infrastructure.
These things are insane, and they use way too many resources, in my opinion. I really think that we need to go back to a host model service, like what we had in the early 2000s.
I think 1% of the current infrastructure could serve the actual needs. Most of this is powering AI's capacity to glean your personal information, to glean your preferences, to curate an addictive social media model for you, to apply AI, not to give you a new and greater life, but to market more effectively to you and pull more money out of your pocket for stuff you 99% chance don't need it.
Well,
it's this is a very pessimistic view, but I think it's fair considering that the corporate for-profit model is still behind every social media company out there. I think they're out for a form of, mind control is a misnomer because it says you have no control over it, but mind manipulation to the extreme because they want you in not just buying products that they market, but also subscribing to the politics that benefits them. Every piece of information you pull off of your social media is influencing you somehow, some way, whether it's what you spend, what you do with your time, what your ideologies are, or who you vote for. You are being manipulated by this monolith of information. And
I think that's right, because like I said, it's all about dogma. It's not necessarily about faith. And I think that's why people are turning to things like Buddhism, or like, I don't know if he worked with Adney, but he goes on a hike with his kids every 3 weeks, like clockwork. And he tries to go on a hike at least twice a week.
I respect that deeply.
Because he believes that you live in a place that is so beautiful and it's about spiritual connection. And he talks like a total hippie. He's like, trust me, man, we gotta do this together, bro. And he's this down-to-earth Jamaican black guy from New York City, which is really weird that he's in Utah, but besides the point, he is so down-to-earth, and he really wants to make sure that you're taken care of, which is so cool. That is so different than most, tradesmen out there these days. I really, truly believe that we have done a disservice to our tradesmen.
Most tradesmen, I love them, but they are pawns.
They absolutely are.
They don't know what to do without a boss telling them what to do.
They've been manipulated and they've been led by a carrot for too long. And that carrot...
That's not just a carrot.
The carrot's not necessarily money. I would say the carrot's more information because...
Oh, you mean the carrot on the stick?
Yeah.
I thought this was an allusion to the orange president, but...
No, he's a tangerine. He's a tangerine. There's an actual meme.
Cheeto.
No, there's a meme out there. I saw this from my adoptive grandparents. My husband's grandma and grandpa showed me this meme, and it was hilarious. And it was Donald Trump in an orange tree with the face of an orange. It was hilarious. It was beautiful. Absolutely fantastic. Loved it. And it doesn't matter what you subscribe to politically. You don't have to agree with me. And
it's still a funny image.
Absolutely. I've seen memes of, Vance putting Cheeto dust on Trump's face, like makeup, with a makeup brush, which is funny. But it comes down to what you deem as value. And I think dogma has literally been the catalyst for destructive patterns of behavior. And so I really think that if we're to fix our industry and be more like Canada, people say, oh, we can't be like the Canadians, they're soft, they're weak. I'm like, just remember, the Canadians are the ones that did the things the CIA couldn't at once upon a time during World War II. They snuck into a military base, drugged everyone's food. It was only supposed to be a sedative, and they said for good measure it was a lethal dose.
There's two reasons.
But you know what I mean? They're cheeky, they're quiet, and they're just like, we're gonna do our thing.
There's two reasons we won't be like Canada, and it's not like I'm not saying it's because we can't. It's because our people won't. Now, of course, we keep talking in the context of construction. It's fair that we not try to talk too much on too much else because we don't know too much else. Construction has been both of our lives, so I'm going to talk about construction. We have a culture where if you end up in construction, it's because you were too worthless for any other profession. I had the aptitudes to become an engineer. I was in...
You said the quiet part out loud, man. That's golden. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it. We know what Americans think about construction workers, and we get a bad rap. And when some of us are actually competent, actually skilled, actually capable, actually could have done other things with our lives. For context, I had a physics teacher that I did so well in that class. I was such an outstanding student. She about cried when I told her I wanted to go into aircraft mechanics. She said, "You should be a physicist." And I look at the physicists I know, and they're scraping by to make a living. Why? Because our country doesn't give a shit about scientists making a living, doesn't care about putting money into education, about putting money into R&D, about putting money into all the things that made America great in the 1950s, by the way, because we had an epically high amount of money put into R&D, into research projects, into NASA, into nuclear science, into physics, into all these things that made the universities great at the time.
Or made America great at the time.
And made those professions worth going into by people that at least wanted to make a good living, at least wanted to have some repute in their community, at least wanted to have some status in life, and said, well, I'm also smart, so I can do that thing. I looked at that and said, well, I'm smart. Where's the fruit? What fruit is that life going to bear if I actually go into the sciences and become a physicist? I talked to enough physicists at the time. They were doing tug-of-wars for limited positions at the universities they were working at. They were working for almost peanuts.
I mean, they're still, granted, a lot of them are still making six figures, but...
If they could find a job. And right now, it's a rat race. You know, you've got guys that won't find a job until their 40s. And they spend that time, you know, maybe scraping by as tutors, maybe scraping by in the lesser jobs of academia, because there's too many students, too many academics for the jobs that are provided for said academics.
I had this conversation with my husband yesterday, and I'd like to get your insight. You know how, like, Ben Shapiro and all those guys will dog on, you know, lesbian art theory majors and useless degrees?
I'll dog on some of the useless degrees.
Well, I don't think they're useless, because here's something fascinating. I was looking at career trajectory, income, upward mobility, and all of that kind of stuff. The people that get degrees in lesbian art theory, Ben Shapiro's usual argument is they're not getting jobs. Although he's correct. Sorry, excuse me. He is correct that they're not getting jobs. Mm-hmm. But you know what they're doing? They're starting businesses and starting nonprofits. While everyone else who is going to school is doing what? Trying to work for somebody else. In 1950, 70% of Americans were small business owners. Mm-hmm. As of 2024, that number has dropped down to 31%.
Yeah, I think I heard a stat from Cody Sanchez. Pretty good podcast. She says some wild things I don't agree with, but hey, who agrees with everything?
I mean, if you agree with your parents 100% of the time, you might as well stay a child, you know?
I think she said something like, I wish I recalled the figure, but I think it's over 80% of small businesses are started by immigrants.
Yep, and the remaining 20% are from art majors.
Roughly that. Now, you look at certain things, what makes a business founder? This is an incredibly subjective answer. I don't have 100% of the data, but I say if your aptitude vastly transcends your immediate opportunity for employment, that's a recipe for a business owner. Now, a lot of immigrants, they have opportunities that are at the bottom of job opportunities. Why? Because they may have a hard time with the language. because they're new in the country, because they don't have connections, because they're not well vetted for a lot of things that this country requires of higher status employees. But they may bring tremendous aptitudes, whether it's in business or finance or technology or service or food preparation. They bring all these aptitudes and they're, okay, what are my opportunities in the working environment versus what could I reap owning a small restaurant, owning a cleaner, doing some small service, being a service tech. It's a massive imbalance.
Huge.
I, as an electrician, can make 6 figures because, I grew up here. I learned crafts early on. I learned how to navigate the system. I was raised to speak good English. Looking at a code book that looks like legal script is not intimidating to me. It is legal script. It's not intimidating to me because I grew up with this language. I didn't have any challenges getting into an apprenticeship because of my immigration status. I was born here. I inherited my citizenship. And so I had no boundaries to getting into this craft. But I can imagine that someone that did with the same aptitudes would say well, maybe I do want to make, custom cabinetry or custom furniture.
Well, and even that's harder now. My brother wants to do custom cabinetry and stuff, and the only way he's going to be able to start a business is through the internet, and he doesn't.
It's just an example I threw out there.
Right. But the reason why
refined handiwork.
And this is why I keep going back to technology as a whole, is because industries that are unwilling to adapt and move with the innovations of the day are the ones that get forgotten. The auto workers in Michigan never thought they were going to get replaced, and their hubris was their downfall. Oh, yeah. Construction work is going to be the same way if we do not course correct. Can humans do absolutely incredible, unique pieces of constructing and just absolutely wonderful, limitless powers of just anything your brain can come up with?
This might come off a bit Machiavellian or a bit survivalistic. But if you want to win at something and people want to dig their feet into the ground and stay where they're at, there's a time to leave them behind.
I don't think that's Machiavellian enough. But here's where I'm getting with all of this. And we're probably coming up here on time a little bit. But in Australia, they're trying a pilot program for public education. Teacher is still in the room to make sure that coursework is maintained. Sorry, a compressor just kicked on outside, so if you can hear that. But something interesting that they're doing is they're using artificial intelligence in classrooms to do the teaching, and they picked 5 kids that were 2 or 3 grade levels behind, and then they picked kids that were ahead, and then they gave them ChatGPT without filters or anything and said, okay, you're going to have 3 AI conversations, 1 for English, 1 for history, and 1 for arithmetic. Mm-hmm. The history is also going to include language arts, and same with your English. So you're going to have the ability to build your vocabulary that way. The kids that were 2 grade levels behind got caught up in a month and a half.
So I recall watching one of the newer-ish Star Trek movies. I think it's about a decade old. And it depicts Spock in his Vulcan classroom as a kid. And every kid is standing in a sort of holographic generator. And each one is getting tutors directly to them through this computerized program. Every kid is basically having a sci-fi above and beyond version of what you're talking about. ChatGPT is introductory level to a future where kids can enter their classroom and the AI will curate to their immediate interests but still direct them to the topics that are intended.
Well, and that's why the teacher was still in the classroom.
Always on a one-on-one basis, and the teacher's still in the classroom because, hey, they're human and they have human needs, and ChatGPT cannot address those needs.
Exactly, but what I'm getting at is the fact that kids, in a semester or less could get caught up that were 2 levels behind, that's incredible. And in fact, one of the kids that was 2 grade levels behind, who he didn't have his multiplication tables memorized. He had his multiplication tables memorized. He was doing pre-calc by the end of the semester. Mm-hmm. That is a future we can have. That is impressive. But there's a lot of universities, there's a lot of schools, there's a lot of ways we do things in the trades that are very archaic. People say, okay, well, you're never going to have a calculator, so you can't use a calculator. Now everyone has a calculator in their pocket. Okay, well, you can't use the code book that has any written documentation in there because that's cheating. I'm like, the code book is legal documents. Let me give you an example that's kind of interesting. When you go through and you do your LSATs, right? If you're going to be a lawyer, a legal scholar of any kind, all LSATs are theoretical. Yeah, you have to line certain sections of law up, but every single question is a theoretical. Why is it that we study as electricians a code book that is the minimum requirements for installation, right, as dictated by the NEC, but the other issue is that we are not given theoreticals to help us be better tradesmen?
I need a second to process a good answer for that.
That might be a little too deep, and maybe that's a...
No. I'm going somewhere with this, but I think I think that the structure we have has curated a system befitting what they expect the competency to be of those entering the trade. The trade doesn't ask for America's best and brightest, which I think it honestly could, and could go phenomenal places. I think this trade deserves as much respect as any mechanical or electrical engineer. We go through a lot of physical hell, but we also have to be competent enough, at minimum, not to burn down a project because of mishandling our installations. And above and beyond that, just higher competency results in lower error rates. And the more complex our jobs continue to get as we proceed into more and more complex systems that we build, the more money and resources can be saved by a lack of errors. Right now, everything feels like it's dummy-proofed. Like when we have commissioning projects happening, I was trained up for 2 months in Phoenix when I was on the project out there to be a commissioning person. And the ridiculous amount of safeguards that are put on simply turning on a switch is asinine. I'm like, this is being curated to people that they expect to be complete idiots, to not hurt themselves or damage property by the mishandling thereof. This could be accomplished by someone actually knowing what they're doing instead of putting 10 people on a one-man job.
I agree with that. Well, and this is what's interesting to me, is that, one, we have declining enrollment. We have industries that are pushing back against technology. I mean, we have tuggers, right? How hard is it to believe that we could have robots and RC cars that pull wire and cable tray and have it completely automated? I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, but the reason why we don't... You know what I mean? But the reason why we don't allow for it is because, one, it takes away something from someone to do. Two, I think it's because people are afraid that if we allow for that one thing to be taken away, it'll take everyone else's job. And I think, although it is a fair concern, I don't think that should be the reason why we do certain things. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. We should be looking at that as, holy Toledo, we, for the first time, have an opportunity and a way to fix things. We can make life a lot easier. All we have to do is X, Y, and Z, but if we do it this way, we should be able to achieve A, B, and C.
Well, one of the most burgeoning costs that keeps a lot of projects from even taking off and, being built is the prohibitive high cost of electrical labor. There's a lot of would-be innovators, would-be investors that say, "Oh, you want to pay? You want to charge us $150 an hour per man hour? I don't think we can float this. If we could even just keep charging the man hours at that rate, there's a lot of professionals and consultants and people that do what they do that charge more than that per man hour. But if we could make a 1,000,000 man hour job into a 500,000 man hour job, guess what? More people are gonna take those bids. More people are gonna accept it. They might even be willing to pay a higher rate per hour that they're paying for. Just if you cut out man hours, correct. Higher efficiency. That is a long-winded way to say we could be more efficient. But really,
but I think that just shows cases like the intricacies that these projects go through to try and maintain workmanship and manpower, and it's not realistic because they did a survey as a part of the 2024 run through for trade enrollment. What do you think the average age of a new person enrolled in any trade program is?
It's not fair because we've talked about this already, but go ahead.
It's 41. That's the average age for new enrollment. Utah is an outlier where the median age is 28, which is still not great.
Which really just reflects our population because we have a younger population.
Yeah, it really does.
Utah has the lowest average age of people compared to any other state just because it is so family-centric, so focused on...
And that's a reason why a lot of people...
The state caters to having kids, which also explains our exploding population.
Exactly. But when you look at all of that, I think we really... and this really comes down to what we've been talking about this whole time, the disservice we're doing to our tradesmen. And so... I'd be interested to know for our audience if anyone has had similar thoughts or concerns, because I'm just thinking about this, wrapping it up, and I am concerned that we're not taking AI seriously enough, and I don't think we need to be afraid of it. I think we really need to embrace it, and that could save our industry, that could save our jobs. But when we give so much pushback, that could replace all of our jobs, because at that point, especially with large companies like Cache Valley or Cupertino, they could be like, that's a liability. We're going to reduce our man-ups on our large jobs by around 20%, and we're going to use automated systems, and we're just done.
Even the Bible described in creation, he created things to act and things to be acted upon. It's our choice which category we fall into. Are we acted upon by AI, or do we act upon it? Do we let it influence our lives, or do we use it to be the influence? Now, even if that influence is self-preservation and making your job efficient enough to remain relevant, why not take the reins?
Exactly, and I think that is a great note to leave this on, and I do think that artificial intelligence can help us. I think it needs to be there.
I will add artificial intelligence and automation. Artificial intelligence alone is like a brain in a jar that's still functioning. Automation is like giving a body to that brain. Automation is all the things that give tangibility or give a tangible function to that AI.
I would agree with that. And so, let me know what you guys think. Maybe if you have any thoughts about how we can improve our industries at large, put your thoughts down below, because I think everyone deserves a safe, inclusive, and happy place to work. Thank you for being here on this special episode, and until next time, I'll catch you on the next one.